Knights of Light. As a past life regressionist and spiritual counselor for the last 7 years, and a crisis counselor, diagnostician, and psychotherapist for the last 20, a crisis counselor, diagnostician, and psychotherapist for the last 20, I have taken hundreds of people back to their past lives. Many of the sessions have been profoundly moving and healing. But my favorite of all was one in which I was the client and the facilitator was Dr. Brian Weiss. I had not asked for the experience, and it was completely unexpected when Brian offered a wonderful surprise. The fact that it was to be on stage, under the lights and in front of so many people, was a bit daunting, but there was no way I was going to pass it up. Brian and I had spoken a number of times, privately, mostly about our work. I don't talk about it much, but he was aware that I was living with chronic pain in my back. I had regressed many people by then but had never been regressed myself. I felt both excited and concerned. I knew that I was almost as left-brained and empirically based in my thinking as Brian. That fact, and the chronic pain I experienced constantly, made it seem unlikely that I would be readily induced into trance. Moreover, I knew every word of Brian's induction. I knew where he was going to try to take me, and exactly how, with what words. As I stepped up on the stage, I whispered to Brian, away from the microphones, "Please don't get discouraged if you can't take me there. If this doesn't work, it will be my fault, not yours." Brian looked into my eyes and said, "Let's see what happens," as calmly as if he was saying, "Isn't it a beautiful day?" He made no attempt to perform anything remotely like a standard induction. He simply began talking to me, as if we were sitting together on a park bench. I remember thinking, when is he going to hypnotize me? The words he said were not at all what I expected. "Tell me a few things about your childhood. What was that like?" he asked. Sitting next to him on the stage with my eyes gently closed, a wonderful, early memory did come to me, one I had completely forgotten. Merely by talking, Brian was able to transport me to a beautiful memory, with inordinate clarity, from my childhood. As he took me to a past life, I became conscious of how incredibly quiet it had gotten in the room. I began to feel an enormous wave of heat flowing toward me from the silent audience. There was an intense feeling of prayer and goodwill in the room, as I began searching in all directions with my eyes closed for an image to appear. An air of expectancy seemed to be building. Seconds turned into minutes as I searched for an image, and I could actually feel the crowd right there with me, willing me into an experience, group praying that the images would come. Just as I was about to say, "I'm sorry, Brian, but I see nothing," I saw the dirty face of a young boy, perhaps 12 to 14 years old. I immediately felt, knew, somehow, that I was this young boy. I was standing just a few feet inside the shade of a forest, talking young boy. I was standing just a few feet inside the shade of a forest, talking to a knight who was in the forest with me. I was putting a bridle and a saddle on the knight's horse. The knight's armor was laid out all around on the ground next to me. Next to the armor I saw a curious little set of steps, just 3 steps, with a halter attached to them at the back. These steps could be put on one's back, like a backpack. The heat from the crowd had grown increasingly intense, and the quiet in the room was deafening. "It is the Middle Ages," I finally said, and a huge group sigh of relief rose up from the audience in front of me. They had all been attempting to assist Brian and me with their focus, their own healing intentions and prayers, and now they realized I had made it there. I could see myself very clearly in a life long ago. "I am a young page," I explained. "I am wearing crude sandals, made of rope, with leather on the bottoms. My hair is straight, dark brown, and looks as if someone put a bowl over my head and cut around it. My face is dirty, and I am wearing what looks like a burlap potato sack, with holes cut in it for my arms and legs. I have a rope belt tied around my sack dress at the waist. Just outside the forest, to the left, is a huge, open field, and men are assembling there. There are knights on horseback, and many more are walking, with various weapons and shields. Some simply had large axes and crude clubs and maces. Others had swords and knives with them. Still others had long bows and crossbows. All were coming together, mingling and talking, there in the field. Thousands were arriving from every direction. On the hill to our right was a large, beautiful castle with tall turrets. I was now finished putting the bridle and saddle on the horse, and I was standing on the top step, putting chainmail down over the knight's upper body. There were tears welling in my eyes as I heard myself begin to speak. "They say you will not return, that you're going to die." "Who said that?" he asked. "Everyone. They say that the army you go to fight is 10 times the size of ours, and that you and most of the others will die." The knight looked directly into my eyes as he said, "Do not fear, for dying is easy, it is living that is hard. To die valiantly on the field of battle with my friends is an honor, and it is a destiny we all know awaits us. I am not afraid, because I know that our souls live on and go up to heaven when our body dies. We never truly die." By this time I was crying silently as I began to slide his armor over his head. Tears were running down my cheeks. "Don't go. You don't have to go, head." Tears were running down my cheeks. "Don't go. You don't have to go," I whispered. Still crying, I began placing his helmet down over his face and head. I positioned the steps next to his horse, and he slowly and carefully walked up them. Swinging his leg over the side of the saddle, he said, "Remember what I have said here today. If I do not return, we will meet again in heaven." With that, he turned his horse toward the quickly filling field of men and rode out of the darkness of the forest toward them. Brian moved me ahead in time, and I saw 4 men walking into the castle courtyard, carrying a knight. He was lying on his back, on his shield. I did not want to believe it was he, but I knew that it was. I began running, chasing them into the castle, and arrived as the knight was being placed on the ground. They removed his helmet, and the men began feeling around his waist belt and retrieved a small, leather pouch. Opening it, they pulled out a small note on a crude piece of paper. What they read aloud from the note instantly made me both happy and sad. "To he who finds this note, it is my last wish that my horse, my sword and armor, all of my personal property, and my station in this life go to my page." Of course, that was I was distraught that I would not see him again in that life. I appreciated all that he had done for me, but I also began to realize, then and there, that I might be looking down at and realizing my own future. Yes, knights fight and knights die, I thought. I was crying openly as the men handed me his sword and began stripping the armor from his body and handing it to me. There was no sensation of celebration. I had lost my dear friend and was being filled with a sense of duty, a duty that I had doubts I could perform. Moving forward in time to see more of my life as the page, I found myself in the castle courtyard, now taller and a little older. I wore a simple, long shirt, with no armor at all. I was fighting with a man much larger and stronger than I with big wooden swords. I was attempting to block his unrelenting blows but failing miserably. Every 3 or 4 blows, the man would strike or plunge the dull, wooden sword into my body. Each time he did, I heard him shout, "Dead. You are dead." It was a lesson in humiliation, humility, and patience. It seemed effortless for him to continue killing me over and over with different swipes and blows to my body. The images began rapidly shifting, and I grew taller and more broad-shouldered in each as other men continued to train me to fight. Fear, trepidation, and anxiety tugged at me each time I died, there in the courtyard, as I sensed that one day before long my adversary would not be my friend, and the swords would not be made of wood. Brian smoothly took me forward in time again, and I was now fully grown. Brian smoothly took me forward in time again, and I was now fully grown, standing in chainmail, a handsome man in my early 20s. The armor now fit perfectly. I stood inside the courtyard of the castle and a page stood in front of me on the set of steps, sliding my armor over my head and upper body. With tears in his eyes, he begged me not to go, just as I had done so with the knight when I was a page, and I repeated the very same words to him that I had heard so long ago. Soon I saw myself on a large, broad, open plain. The land was flat and dusty. I was in the thick of a massive battle. I was on my horse, and there in front of me on his own horse was a huge, powerful knight, much larger than I. He was clearly very experienced, as he was raining relentless blows down upon me with a massive, heavy sword. The fighting was extremely loud now, close and intense, and I could hear men swearing, groaning, yelling, and screaming. The battle seemed to be coming from everywhere, from all sides. The clanging of metal against metal, the frightened cries of horses and men, the dust continuing to rise. I was growing weaker each time I fended off another blow from this man's sword. Just then, on my left, I saw a tall man coming up from behind me on foot. I had enough time to notice him in my peripheral vision as he lifted a sword to strike me. With one swift, slashing motion, I swung my sword down toward him. It cleaved his left shoulder and arm completely off, and he fell back to the ground. At that moment, I saw an amazing thing. The man whose entire left shoulder I had severed was wobbling to his feet and coming up behind me. With the last bit of energy he could summon, his right hand laid his blade flat, down onto the back of my saddle, with the tip against the center of my spine, under the back curvature of my armor. He leaned all his weight against the tip, and I felt a burning sensation as his sword entered my body. Helpless, I began to convulsively twitch and shake as I watched the entire blade emerge from my lower belly. Mortally wounded, I found myself lying in the dust, the sword sticking out of my lower abdomen. There, only a few feet away from me, lying on his side, was the man I had just killed, the man who had just killed me. The sheer madness of war could be heard all around us. The screams of the swords, the horses snorting and rearing up in pain and terror, the wounded men scattered all over the ground. Many were calling out, calling for their mothers and wives, swearing, screaming, crying, "Please kill me. Please kill me, I beg of you." Curiously, I could feel no pain and no fear, only a warm calm coming over my entire body. Perhaps I was in shock. I looked over at the man who was dying on the ground just in front of me. He was silent, staring at man who was dying on the ground just in front of me. He was silent, staring at me as I stared at him. The two of us exchanged these last gazes silently, looking into one another's eyes, blinking in the dust, knowing that each would be the last person we ever saw in this life. And then, I became aware of a subtle stirring inside me, and I felt a very odd but pleasant sensation. I had closed my eyes, and I was gliding, floating out and above myself, feeling completely weightless. I gazed down at myself, not at the body lying on the ground but at the thing that rose from it, which could somehow look down and see the former me, my shell. I was an intensely bright, white light, so powerfully strong that it was difficult to behold. I was only about 5 feet above myself, and I glanced over to where my adversary had been lying. He too had become a luminous white cone, hovering just above his own body. With joy, I explained to Brian that my adversary and I were now 2 cones. "Cones," he repeated. "Yes, we look like cone-shaped white lights." Both of us began to rise slowly over the field, and I could see that thousands of men were still fighting and that the battle had stretched nearly a half-mile in every direction. As we went up a bit higher, I began to witness something deeply moving and truly incredible. All around and through the battlefield, I could see countless brilliant cones of light slowly rising upward, rising from the dust in every area of the battle. We were all ascending, becoming farther and farther from the conflict below, our souls weaving into the air in an indescribably beautiful movement. It was such a stunning contrast from the horror and chaos of the war beneath us. "Are there any lights that are bigger or brighter than the others?" Brian asked. "No, we look exactly the same." "Any lights going down?" he wondered aloud. I could feel his fascination, his keen interest in what I was seeing. "No, we are all the same and we are all going up," I responded. "There is what looks like a giant funnel that has formed in the center of a very large cloud, and we are all floating toward its center. I feel wonderful, as if I am swimming in an ocean of love. I have never felt so wonderful. No pain at all. I feel better than I ever did in my body, completely untethered from it, free of it. No pain, no worry, only great peace and bliss. How many other lights are ascending with you?" "Hundreds," I whispered. "There are hundreds of cones above us, and hundreds," I whispered. "There are hundreds of cones above us, and hundreds more coming in from below." I felt us all begin to float into the funnel, and I described what this was like. The funnel's end is large, but there is a narrower, more luminous tunnel attached to it as you enter, filled with an extremely strong white light. There are about 30 cones crowded in there with me, and we are all the same light as the tunnel. I was in absolute awe. I was later shown a photo of that moment, taken by someone in the audience. I was looking straight up, above me, my head rocked back, and my expression was just that, one of complete, revelatory awe. "We have come to a great room. It is incredibly bright white in here as well, the whole room, but this room seems limitless, it has no walls. So many beautiful white cones are floating, hovering, all around. There is great peace here, as well as the sensation that enormous, limitless love surrounds us. Two brilliantly lit, very wise-looking old men with white robes and long beards have come for someone. They are leaving with a group of about 30 cones, getting smaller and smaller as they disappear to the right. I wonder where we go from here. Do they come for you? Brian asked. Not yet, but I am calm and patient. There are so very many of us. It is so peaceful here, and I know that they will come for me when it is my time, I replied. As we waited, Brian asked, what do you think you learned from that life? That war and killing are madness. That no one wins, and all on both sides lose. Every time a man on either side falls on the battlefield, misery befalls their families and their loved ones, who grieve very deeply. The men who die need not be grieved for. They are experiencing pure love and bliss as they are welcomed back to the resting place. But the grief, pain, and depth of the sorrow it causes their loved ones and so many others is incalculable. Every time one man falls, someone at home loses a son, a brother, a husband, a father, an uncle, a nephew, a friend. Their grief and pain run deep, and the hole that is left in their lives is never filled until we meet again in heaven. Then we can lay down this burden of grief that we felt would never fully abate, and we can see and embrace our loved ones who have gone before us in the peace and serenity of the resting place. Love is the constant, most important thread that runs through the tapestry of all of our lives. It is what makes living so very sacred and special. To share our love and be loved makes living so very sacred and special. To share our love and be loved, nothing else is remotely as important. I opened my eyes as I was brought out of the trance and looked out at the audience. Many of them were crying and smiling at the same time. Those, I thought, are tears of joy. They were happy and thankful for what they had just witnessed, as was I. I had never anticipated that such a joy and blessing would come my way. Brian asked if the area in my back where I was stabbed is the area where I experienced the most back pain. I replied that it was the exact same place. Since that day in the summer of 2009 I have had a noticeable reduction in the pain. Approximately 1/3 of it is completely gone, and I now have hope that even more of it will recede in the fullness of time. Clearly seeing and experiencing your life and death from over 500 years ago is a truly amazing experience. You are changed. Your eyes are then fully open to the truth of what we are. We go through a universal metamorphosis, over and over again, until we learn our lessons here on earth. When we die, the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, and we float up and out of our body and straight back to our loved ones, and our rightful resting place, in heaven. Michael Brown. Michael's description of the funnel into which the night souls entered, the tunnel connected to it, and the clustering of the hundreds and hundreds of light cones is so wonderfully reminiscent of Raymond's imagery in the first story of this chapter. We would approach a vortex-type opening, shaped like a funnel. Once we passed through the long tube into the universe, we would join with others in what appeared to be a blanket made up of millions of us. And, of course, Raymond's description itself is wonderfully reminiscent of a concept that has existed since the 2nd century. Voices from across the globe and across the ages speak to us again and again of the spiritual immortality that belies our physical mortality. We are the light, not its shadows. To picture this, think of the sun. We are as powerful and resplendent as that glorious star. Here in physical bodies, we have forgotten that we are the light, the sun, instead believing that we are only its reflections, the shadows that it casts. We are exquisite beings of pure and brilliant light, swimming in a sea of bliss. The recognition that we are light is, literally, enlightenment. When we leave the body, everything is clear. We are bathed in a state of absolute and constant peace, no longer afflicted by the temporary emotions of fear and despair. There is no pain, only a sense of well-being. And when the glowing and wise old men with the white robes and long beards come to take us home and joyously reunite us with our loved ones, we will finally be completely healed. We will be whole again. This peace does not need to be something we obtain only when we rise from our bodies and leave the earth behind. The earth needs it too. Peace must be found within ourselves and throughout the world, not only at the individual level but also at the international one. What if we finally decided to stop engaging in wars? What if our countries cooperated instead of competed? And what if, as this next story by Bethany suggests, our political structures and systems were to be founded on and motivated? Soulmate, this is a part of Zindagi Ki Roshni consultancy. It has been established for those who have lost someone and for those who are very sad in their life. About 100 PDF books and 20 short audio books of this topic will be sent to those who join it. This data will be sent to their email or WhatsApp. If you want to join this organization, then please send WhatsApp message to this number.